Black and white thinking. Broad spectrums of thought and morality become reduced to two options: good versus evil, love versus hate, weak versus strong, humble versus proud, etc.
Yeah, I think that is a big one. That was part of my some nuance, please plea. It did feel like a lot of it was black and white. A lot of it was very much good and bad. The reason I'm hesitating a little bit is because there were often people saying things like that I brought up before, there's no one way to be trans, and that they very often pushed like this spectrum of expression that you could somewhere fall on. You could fall on anywhere on this spectrum of expression. So it's not really black and white. It's really that there's all these shades of gray that you could fall into. But the thinking itself and the ideology, there's very much right way to think and a wrong way to think. So in that sense, it was very black and white.
Even in the plea, some nuance pleas where it's like any variation from the right way of thinking is considered bad, but that's the nuance that you're asking for. And so it's kind of like allow for some shades of gray so people can think a little bit differently on these things is encapsulated in that plea. Mm-hmm. The other thing that people will say goes along with black and white thinking is splitting, where someone is either all good or all bad. And when you tie that into the dogma and the ideology, it's saying that if you don't believe or hold to these things that we assert, then you are a bad person. And then it follows that if you're a bad person, because we're talking about important things like hate and bigotry, that you fall into the same category of all the bigots and all the phobes that have ever existed. And since they've done all these terrible things in the past, we are now justified in doing terrible things to you to prevent you from ushering in a new era of hate and bigotry. And it just polarizes and divides people.
Yes, and that's something I experienced in like the conversation I had with a friend where we had known each other for more than 10 years. And for whatever happened is I detransitioned, I changed my mind. And when I changed my mind, I stopped being a person with so many shades of gray who has all of these other opinions and past experiences and so on, and just became one completely bad person and not worth even hearing out, basically. So
what do you think? Black and white thinking.
Severe.
Identification and example. Those who behave correctly or incorrectly are used as examples. Suggested behavior can be inferred from those stories without direct commandment. Stories are told which may be reframed or blatantly untrue to demonstrate consequences. So it seems to me like the trans suicide phenomenon is very close to that, where the idea is if you have someone who really is trans and you don't affirm them from the beginning, then you are going to get a dead son or daughter in the future rather than a live trans son or daughter. Any other ways that something like that, where they would bring up an example of someone who either doubted or conformed, and because of their outcome, that's a lesson for all of us?
Yeah, and there are a few that people will pull up, and people certainly like to weaponize suicide specifically. So to bring it back to Tumblr, there was a trans girl on Tumblr, I guess a teenage boy, but who wrote their suicide note, posted it on Tumblr, and I think there was some, can't think of the word, but basically people did look into it to verify that it was a true story. This person did end up killing themselves by stepping into traffic, from what I remember. And that story got brought up a lot because what they wrote in the letter had to do with feeling marginalized for being trans, and like basically like putting out this plea that trans people should be listened to and hopefully that things get better. And people really used that one story over and over as this example of, if things don't get better, this is what's going to happen to all of our youth.
So that story then shuts down any conversation, any nuance, any dialogue in the future. Okay, how would you rate it?
I'll say probably moderate. But yeah, I'm trying to think of, I think the way that people do public shaming as well, that also ties in to people being made examples of. Yeah.
All right. Us versus them thinking. Outsiders, ex-members, and critics are dehumanized, labeled as evil, apostate, vicious, hateful, prideful, blinded, deceived, etc. A persecution complex may exist whereby reasonable criticism is reframed as an attack. This is similar to that no honorable exit, but this also includes anyone who never actually joined anyone who's not on the in group.
Yeah, it's the process by which anyone who criticizes transition gets labeled a TERF, basically.
Yeah, that's a great example of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much more to say than that.
You mentioned TERF, for people unfamiliar with it, is what people in the trans community call, I guess, feminists who believe that biological males should be excluded from women's spaces regardless of their self-identity, but they're considered hateful bigots from the perspective of the gender ideology. Is that right?
Yeah, but it has become like a catch-all term. So it stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist, but you don't have to be a radical feminist for someone to call you a TERF. They'll just do it anyway. It's really just like it's almost become synonymous with transphobe. It feels like it doesn't really have a meaning anymore, but
TERFs are abusive bullies. The movement itself weeds out good, inspiring, amazing feminists who really want to do the work of ending misogyny. So what's left in the TERF movement are people, frankly, who get off on being abusive bullies. Period. TERFs are delusional abusers. And immoral ones. They're using feminism as an excuse to be delusional abusers.
So I don't think I need to dwell on the reasons that TERFdom is the political equivalent to radioactive six-day-old backwash.
Fuck you! Fuck you fucking white cracker! Fuck you ugly piece of shit! You look like you got your teeth knocked out, you fucking fascist! Nobody knows who you are and nobody cares, and you will die alone! You will die alone and you will burn in hell! He hates women, he hates children, he hates trans people, he hates queer people! He's a far-right lunatic propagandist! If you support anything he fucking says, you are indoctrinating everyone you know into being a Nazi. Matt Walsh is a sarcastic terrorist. They can be gay. It's not they can be gay, that's fine. That's why you don't push things on people while they're a child.
yeah,
Okay. How do you rank this one then?
severe.
Okay.